Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, back with more Christmas cards and tags. Although these technically could be like just winter themed if you skipped out on the Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays wafer dies I use later on, but we'll get to that. Anywho, I'm using My Favorite Things. This is the Festive Friends stamp set. And I've lined up all of the images in the set on some Neenah Classic Crest Solar White 80-pound cardstock. And I'm using my MISTI so I can stamp all of these images at once. And I spaced them all so that I'll be able to die cut them once I'm done coloring. So I'm inking everything up with Ink on 3's Blackout ink. This is a really good Copic friendly ink. And even with new images like this stamp set's brand new, I haven't had a chance to use it yet, I get nearly a perfect impression with the first inking. So I stamped it twice though to get, the spots that I missed pressing down on, and then thought, while I've got it all laid out, lined up, etc., might as well do doubles. Plus, technically, in my head, I was originally thinking, I was like, oh, most of these are snowman images. These are, quick and easy to color. And then I end up going at way more effort than I usually do. So, whatever floats your boat. So, since I used, of course, my preferred cardstock for Copic coloring, Copic friendly ink, I'm using my Copic markers to color. Here, I am doing real time. This is a tiny bit slower than I normally do. When I'm just starting out, I'm just kind of figuring out where I want to place, my darkest color. But once I kind of get in my groove, I do move a little bit quicker. But I like to kind of show that because all my videos I edit, the coloring down. Otherwise, this video would literally be over 40 minutes because I think it took me about half an hour to color the one sheet of all the images. So I just start speeding things up and then in editing, speed it up big time because otherwise we're just going to be here all day. So I do my standard kind of darkest to lightest when I'm coloring with Copic markers because for me it's faster and it's just convenient. I like it. However, if you're newer to Copic markers or you're struggling, if you want more control, definitely lightest to darkest and then kind of work your way back, because the whole point of that is you can always darken up areas if you need to, but it's very difficult to almost impossible to lighten areas. There's ways, with a colorless blender, lighter marker, but generally once the darkest color is down, there's no going back from that. So over all these years, I've just kind of switched to doing darkest to lightest because for me, it's just faster and it's kind of how my brain works with them now. So I did my deer in browns. And then for the snowman, usually my go-to with snowmen is I would do a gray, just as a little bit of shading because it's white. Or I'll add a little bit of a light blue. Sometimes a purple, just depends. You can add almost any color really because it just depends on what sort of look you're going for. But usually with, snowmen, polar bears, penguins, all the things that have lots of white areas that are easy to color, you basically have creative license to do whatever you want. But today I decided to go kind of heavier with the blues and then really, really, really blend that out. So I go all the way to 0 like my colorless blender and really lighten that up. And I do like how it ended up. It just took a little longer than I was originally planning, but I do kind of like that look it gave it. So after I colored in the base of the snowman, I started using just cool grays to do the hats and all of their boots to, again, keep things kind of simple. Didn't really have a color combo in mind when I started this. I had just a rough idea because obviously it's browns for reindeers, the blues for the snowman. And then I was like, well, you got to bring in some red because I want to do the reindeer noses red because that's just, again, habit. And then I'll start bringing in actually some purple and some green and a little bit of a turquoise color as well because those are kind of my personal favorites when it comes to Christmas colors. But at the same time, I'm not always stuck in a color combo. I always like mixing it up and doing, non-traditional colors, other colors, etc., etc. Mostly because otherwise I would just get really bored. I make a lot of cards, so I like to mix it up and, try different color combos, all the different images, different wafer dyes, paper, etc., etc., etc. So after I was done coloring in all the main images, and then I would just switch around and start doing the complementary colors. So like I had said, I did purples. So I did, purple for like their scarves and mitts and whatnot. And then I did sort of like aqua blue sort of colors as well. And then I pulled in some green to just kind of finish it off, since there was enough of all their little accessories to add in those extra colors. And then I also colored in the little snowball, which I totally sort of spaced until afterwards. I did that in the exact same way, obviously, as the snowman. And then once all my coloring was done, I took my Uniball 10 white gel pen. This is like the broadest of the Uniball gel pens. This one is my absolute favorite. I have had such good like results with this. I used to use, was it Uniball? The Uniball one? I actually have it right here. Yeah, the Uniball one. The Uniball Sino gel pen is one I used off and on for years. And this one it's really good too. I find though that one especially you need to use very consistently. If it sits for too long, I don't know exactly how long, it does really sort of like dry up in the nib, and then it's almost impossible to get going again. I mentioned this in a recent video about gel pens, that the biggest thing, especially with the white gel pens, is just consistency in using it. Almost any white gel pen, if you start having troubles with it, it's more often the reason is because it's sat for just too long, and it's the nature of the product. It just starts to dry up in that ballpoint. You can kind of work it out by like warming it up in your hands, etc. But sometimes they just, if you're not using them consistently, they just tend to get skippy and stop working, if that makes sense. So after all the coloring, I die cut everything with the coordinating wafer dies. And then I'm going to start working on the backgrounds for all my cards. So I have the simple Snowflakes background from My Favorite Things. And I've masked off what will be the back of the card. I just put the Post-it tape right against the score line on my card base. And I use my anti-static powder tool on the card. And then I have the stamp face up on my desk, and I've inked it up with Ink on 3's Juicy Clear Embossing ink. And then I'm starting to just press my fingers onto this card front, onto the stamp. And I'm not doing it perfectly. I don't want a perfect impression. I kind of just want it to be a little looser. I'm going to do some ink blending over it, but I don't need the background to be, perfect. So after I stamped it, I also just kind of sprinkled the embossing powder onto it. Again, not completely covering it either. I'm using clear embossing powder for this. And then I'm going to melt all this with my heat tool. And I'm just going to keep repeating this process for all the card bases. I'm going to make 4 cards, and I'm going to make 2 tags while I'm at it. So I just do all these, like I do with anything when I'm making more than one. I do everything at once. So I did, all my coloring at once of the images. I die cut them all. Now I'm doing all this heat embossing on the backgrounds and the tags. And then once that was done, I'm just going to do some really quick and easy ink blending. And I'm using Hero Arts Reactive Inks in Blue Raspberry and Pool Party. That color went really well with the turquoise color I used on all the images. So I'm using my Studio Katia blender brushes and applying the Blue Raspberry first, which is just darker. And then the Pool Party is just basically like a lighter shade of this color. So again, not completely covering the background. I kind of start roughly in the center and just kind of blend that color out, starting with a darker, working my way to the lighter, keeping it really, really simple. I just wanted that color because then it kind of brings out, obviously, those clear heat embossed snowflakes. And because they were heat embossed, they resist all this ink. So then they just show up. So I applied the Post-it tape over and over again to each card base just to make sure I wasn't getting any ink on the back, but really it was kind of redundant because I kept most of the color concentrated to the card fronts. So I did the same thing with the tags, and the tags were die cut with the Treat Tag Die-Namics, and I'll get to the tags in a minute. But I also wanted to do sentiments, of course, for all of these. So I pulled out some purple cardstock, anti-static powder tool, brushed off the excess, and then I'm just stamping some sentiments from that Festive Friends stamp set. So I'm just going to stamp each of the sentiments I want to use twice onto this with that clear embossing ink. And then all of these I'm going to heat emboss with some white embossing powder. So after I've stamped everything, coat all of it in the detail white embossing powder, tap off the excess, and then I'll melt that with my heat tool. And then once all of that embossing powder is melted, I'm going to die cut these with I used the Essential Slanted Sentiment Strips from MFT. Some of these they were released like last year, maybe, I'm not even sure. Everything's still available. I'll have links, as always, to everything in the description box as well as on my blog. But I was like going through my stash and came across these and I was like, ooh, these would be perfect for the sentiments. So I'm just going to tape them into place with washi tape and then die cut all of these sentiments. So once I've got all of these die cut, that's kind of starting to like bring together everything. And then I also used the Happy Holidays circle frame and Merry Christmas circle frame. And again, these came out, I think last year or the year before. I've had them for a while. I've used them in other videos. But yeah, I thought those would be just kind of a cute way to just add something to the backgrounds. And again, you could leave that off and make these more just not specific, you know, Christmas or holiday. They could just be like winter, any occasion sort of cards. But I really liked how these kind of looked. So I'm going to add those to my backgrounds. And for the tag, these, yeah, like I said, these are the Treat Tag Die-Namics. These were meant, I used these in a video around, I think it was like Valentine's, when these were released, because there's a separate wafer die that you can do to create these into like the little Hershey Nuggets pockets and all that stuff. But I just like the shape and the size of these tags. So I just used the Tag Die-Namics themselves. And I adhered the Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays circle frames to the background. And then to create the actual scene, I'm using the Snowy Hillside Die-Namics that I think those were just released. So I used those and I just had to cut down the excess for the tags. And the trees are part of that Snowy Hillside dynamic set. So I die cut those from some green cardstock, kind of figured out how I was going to do my little layout, and then adhered everything together with craft tacky glue. And then for dimension, I'm just using some thin 3D foam squares, which I'm kind of obsessed with. So I'd pop a little bit up, like the one of the snowdrifts I popped up, and then like my little characters I was popping up with the dimensions just to give it that little extra something. And then just flipping the tag over and cutting off the excess of like the sentiment and the snow, like little snowdrifts. And then for the actual cards themselves, exact same process, just on a card. So I don't need to cut anything off because I'm working on A2 card fronts here. So I'm going to, you know, adhere either the Merry Christmas or the Happy Holidays frame, and then adhere one of the snowdrifts from the Snowy Hillside, pop up the second one with the little foam dimensionals, just to give it that little extra bit of, you know, dimension and whatnot. And then finish creating my scene with the trees and then the actual characters that I had stamped and colored, and then the sentiments. So that was the nice thing too about doing multiples. Like I basically was doing 2 of each card and then 2 of the tags. So off camera, I was able to kind of figure everything out, adhere it all, get it the way I wanted it, and then just kind of repeat the process on camera, which made things go a little bit smoother. So got everything adhered, trimmed off the excess of the sentiments, and then just repeated the process for the other cards. So I've got all of my images that I had colored. If I'd only done the one sheet of images, I basically would have just done 2 cards and 1 tag. So by doubling up the images, I got twice as many. So I got 4 cards and 2 tags out of all of this. And even the tags, technically, you could adhere them to a card because they're so large, and that would just be your focal point. And end up with 6 cards instead of 4. Every once in a while, especially at Christmas time, it's kind of fun to make like tags while I'm making cards, because then they're on hand and they're ready to go. So after I had adhered my scenes and they're all done on the front, to do the insides of the cards, I die cut more of the like front, I guess you would say, the front Snowy Hillside Die-Namics here, because it was just the right size, even at the narrowest part, to fit a sentiment on. So I'm going to line these up in my MISTI, and I'm going to stamp more sentiments from that Festive Friends stamp set. And I'm going to stamp these with some Simon Royal Purple ink, because it just coordinates so nicely with that purple cardstock I used. So I just line up each of those little snowbanks, basically, and stamp the sentiment. And I use 2 different sentiments, one for each of the cards. So after I've got all of those stamped, I also had more of the die cut trees. That's also why I decided to add the snowbank, because I had a bunch of little die cut trees sitting on my desk because I made too many. And I was like, oh, gotta use these up. Don't want them to go to waste. So I'm going to adhere the little snowbank with the sentiment on the inside of each card, and then adhere a couple of the trees. And that still leaves plenty of area to write a message, etc. Although again, I've said this in other videos too. When it comes to the insides of my cards, even if I've, covered the entire inside with, a stamped image or a stencil or whatever it is, I just write over it. No problem. Something like this, I like to leave a little more space because it's a little harder to write over an actual die cut. So I'll just write around it. But with something like this, it's nice to just kind of concentrate it all to the lower portion, and then you have the whole inside of the card, to write a message. So it's all good to go. So I repeated this process for all the cards, exact same thing. Adhered a couple trees, adhered the little snowbank with the sentiment, and that finished off the inside. You could totally leave it here, but I want bling, of course. So I'm gonna add some Studio Katia. I have the iridescent ice flakes, which I love. They're so, the color and the reflect of these and just the shape, I just love it. And they mimic the shape of the background, which was perfect. And I also have some just iridescent clear crystals from Studio Katia as well. So I'm going to kind of sprinkle these throughout my backgrounds on all the cards, all the tags, add that bling, satisfy the inner magpie. Once I was kind of happy with the placement of everything, I'm going to adhere all these into place with my jewel picker and more of the craft tacky glue. Just picking them up, putting down a dab of glue, pressing them into place. So did the exact same thing with the tags, just added, a little cluster of these different ice flakes and crystals, and then same thing, adhered them into place. And then once I'm done, all of the cards, all the tags are finished. So as always, like I said, I will have a link below the video to my blog post. I'll have the pictures in the blog post. I'll also have picture links to everything I used. That'll be in the description box below the video, the very first link directly below the video. I'll also have a supply list below the video as well, so you can check that all out there. Thank you guys so much for watching, subscribing, thumbs upping, commenting, all of it. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.